Okay, well, welcome. Here we are all in our makeshift studios, practicing our shelter in place, but we are thankful for anyone who's able to join us or watch this recording. My name is Bruce Clark. I'm the Executive Director of Digital Charlotte, a project of the Night School of Communication. Here with my colleague, Andrew Au and Maria Jimenez. And we have an opportunity this morning to speak with Professor Rick Thames. Rick is the Knight Crane Executive in Residence and visiting journalism professor at the Knight School of Communication at Queen's University. Thanks for joining us this morning, Rick.
Nice to be here.
So we wanted to talk to you about media literacy in this current crisis that we're in, and thinking about all of the information that people are consuming now in different ways and operating in life differently as we are here. Normally we would have done something like this in person, but because of the current circumstances, we're not. But before we jump into that, I was thinking about your 20-year career at the Charlotte Observer and likely longer in journalism. And, where does this pandemic rank in in all of the stories that you would have been involved in and covered and think about? Like, what do you think about this?
Well, in my lifetime, I go back to where I began as a reporter in 1980, actually 1978. And I reported at the Fayetteville Observer at that time and was covering Fort Bragg. And I was there when the Jimmy Carter, who was then president, ordered the raid into Iran to try to rescue the hostages that were being held there. And at that time, that was the biggest world event that I had ever experienced as a reporter. It was huge, but it wasn't this big. And as I look over my career, I think about moments where basically the world, stops and all order of the day is changed. I think about certainly 9/11, and 9/11, this reminds me in many ways of 9/11. And then there's the 2007 financial meltdown, which also brought the world to a stop. But none of those, neither of those did it to the extent that we're seeing right now. So I have to say, I believe that this will be the most earth-shattering event that I've experienced in my lifetime. And I have to think about that for a moment, just to imagine how this overshadows these other events. People's lives have been just upended. So it's really, it's a moment in history. Each generation has this moment in history. I'm old enough to remember the JFK assassination. And of course, I was just a child. I was a fourth grader, but I remember the world did come to a stop then. I wasn't a reporter yet, but I understood that life had changed. And the Cuban Missile Crisis was another moment. I think that was 1962, a moment where actually Americans were gathered around their television in their living room and listening to respected news commentators suggesting that the world was about to come to an end. And so there were moments like that in my life, but they were far briefer. And I think in some ways they just didn't touch us as much as this is touching us now.
Yeah, that's a good, interesting point about when you said earth shattering. The visual struck me there, and I think there's something interesting about this conversation about media literacy and the fervor and the concern and the buildup of on one side are we not doing enough? Is the response not enough? The sort of from the messaging, from the media, from the what are we hearing? And then also hearing that we're and maybe these aren't all coming from respected sources, but I think that's the point of this conversation. Also hearing that we're overblowing this, or we're making too big of a deal about it. It was just 2 weeks ago when the line that, well, this is just the same as the flu was coming out, and now the data is obviously telling us different. But what would you what would you say to a young reporter who's coming into this field, or maybe they don't have to be young, but the folks who are in the media today about their role and responsibility at a time like this?
Well, the first thing I would say to a young reporter is, foremost, be careful, be very careful. I've covered hurricanes, tornadoes, all sorts of calamities. I've sent reporters into earthquakes and all kinds of issues. But the most important thing going into an assignment like this would be make sure that you're going to be safe, because if you're not safe, first of all, your personal safety is the most important thing. And second, you need to be in condition to do the work that's so important for you to do. So just take heed and take the care that you need to take. Journalists naturally are in a position to have to take some risk, and they do take risk, and we're seeing that happen now. I'm struck by how many people are now reporting on television from their living rooms or their basements because they've somehow been exposed to the virus. This is such an overwhelming situation that it's almost impossible not to have that kind of risk. But it is important to not to be foolhardy at the same time. I would say to the young reporter, this is your moment. I mean, this is what journalism is about. This is what it's for. Journalism exists so that we can be a free and self-governing society. It's there to protect us, to safeguard us. It's there to give us the information that we need so that we can, as a people, as a free people, can continue to govern ourselves and make wise decisions. So the reporter on the street is helping the public come to terms with what is the issue and what can be done about it. So you're in a noble profession, and there's not a time when it's more important than it is right now.
Mm-hmm. Andrew or Maria, do you have anything you want to jump in on that? No pressure.
No, although I thought it was interesting when you were talking about, I guess, reporters on television back, just being able to say on previous news of just saying, like, speculating the world might end. I think about that in terms of what we're talking about now with media literacy, in terms of like reporting and understanding what's actually happening, and in being able to process and critically think through all those different news sources that's coming at you. I just think that's really interesting, that it was just a different time where the only source of news you had was from those reporters and those people on television, and being able to hear them say that you can only think of one thing and one thing only. So I just think of how time has changed, where there's countless news sources now, and just how there's an ability to gather so much more information and think through what is actually happening.
It really is. And the added challenge for a journalist today is to be that synthesizer, to help people sort through what's fact and what's fiction, the difference between journalism and news and propaganda. And there's also the confusion that we're having with this virus. I mean, this virus is so little is known about it. If you think back to what was being reported 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was actually some credibility being given to the idea that this is really for people who were 65 or older, right? And that young people did not have to worry about it. Now we know from the experiences, particularly in Italy, and now even in the United States, even here in Mecklenburg County, we can see that this virus attacks young and old alike. And while young people may not be it may not be fatal as often for young people, many young people now are ending up in intensive care. So it's something that we all have to take seriously. So the reporter has to deal with the shifting notions of what this virus is, and help the public sort through that on a day-to-day basis. It bears thinking about, constantly reminding people, this is how much we know at this point, but it's also just as equally important. It's equally important to say, this is what we don't know. because there's so much that we still have to learn about this virus.
Which brings up a good point, is sort of the role and responsibility of the reporter, the news agency, or the person who's sharing information, and then also the consumer of that information. And so when we think about our audiences at the people we work with at Digital Charlotte, which is a project of the Knight School of Communication at Queen's University of Charlotte, we think about government agencies, we think about organizations and nonprofits, and we think about philanthropy and corporate social responsibility. So if we were imagining, and maybe we could take those separately or just kind of keep them together, you know, their role, they all touch community, they all provide information and resources directly to community. Many of them, most of them, have built some level of trust with those communities. So we have the reporting, the sharing of information. We have the intermediary who may be helping get that information directly to communities. And then we have those community members who are consuming that information. So if we were to kind of think about those intermediaries who are helping transmit, or maybe not the right word to use right now, helping share that information directly with their communities, what guidance, what advice might you give a nonprofit here in Mecklenburg County, even an elected official, in terms of how they should be thinking about this? What could they be doing to serve their community at a time like this, when it comes to the media literacy skills that their communities also need?
Well, you might expect me to say this as a journalist, but I really do believe it's true. And that is that transparency is so important, and helping people understand the facts as they are. I think that in times like these, it's very tempting for an institution to be extremely careful about what they communicate to their audiences, because they want to be, you know, they don't want to create panic, or they won't want to give people a misimpression. But the fact is that you know, there are things, for example, we had here in Mecklenburg County just a few days ago, we had a situation where initially our health authorities were being very guarded with who was getting the virus, the demographics of the people who were getting the virus. And I don't mean that they were being, I wouldn't expect them to identify people individually, but the point was, who's getting sick and how are they getting sick, and what do we know about it at this point? And it was, I think, out of being cautious that they might somehow violate someone's privacy inadvertently. But the fact is, once they did begin to release that demographic information, what you saw happening was young people realized that young people were getting sick. And up to that point, there were congregations of young people all over the city who thought, well, this isn't about me. I'll be careful, you know, with my elders, but this isn't about me. And so once the demographics came out and they showed that people 18 to 49 were half of our, you know, basically half of our population that was sick, I think it helped people to come to terms with what they really needed to do. So I would say that, you know, as you're using media, or you know, working through media, first and foremost, be transparent, because to the extent you can, because I think that that's the kind of information that people need. I don't know if that answered your question, but, that's really important, I think. And I think that was a great example of what a difference that can make.
So I'm trying to channel the Renee Hobbs, the media literacy scholar here, and thinking about the way that she's given these sort of guideposts for thinking about media literacy. And you know, there's the 5, I have them written down over here just so I don't mess them up, but access, analyze and evaluate, create, reflect, and act. And I think just taking that first one, access, this is obviously something that's close to the work we do at Digital Charlotte. All these are, but what do we, you know, what is the role of media when it comes to, or even again, these community organizations? I'm sort of meandering here, but thinking about, you know, a lot of news organizations, most all, have been under tremendous pressure over the last 10, 15, 20 years with the shift in technology, the proliferation of technology, to stay alive and to stay afloat. Many have introduced subscription paywalls on their online news content. Some have taken down those paywalls on COVID-19 coverage. Others have not. You know, when we think about access as the first of 5 things that are required for somebody to be media literate, what are your general thoughts there? And then I'm sure Andrew and Maria might have a follow-up on that one too.
Well, as the editor of the Observer, it was always important to me that we drop our paywall in times where the public was in danger and that the public at large needed to understand something. And we did this on numerous occasions, an approaching hurricane, for example, an ice storm, these kinds of things. And of course, I was very pleased to see that the Observer did that again for this event. And at this point, its paywall is down. I don't know if it's for all stories or for coronavirus stories, but it's down for at least the most vital information that people need, I know for sure. And so I see that happening all over the country. And you're right, there's some people who are not doing this in media, and I think that's just a big mistake. There's an imperative for people in journalism, first and foremost. You know, our commitment is to the citizens, and the citizens, when they are in this kind of need, there can be no barrier between us and them. We need to get the information out to the most people as possible. I'm part of a journalism collaborative here in Charlotte right now, the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative, and it consists of the Observer, WFAE, La Noticia, QCity Metro, WCNC, and Q Notes. And today at 1 o'clock, for example, we're going to do a digital conversation, and the digital conversation will be about what is it that local news media is doing that you'd like to see them do more of, and what is it that they're doing that's not helpful to you. So it'll be interesting to see how much of a reaction we get from that. But the hope there is that these media organizations can do a better job for Charlotte. And tonight at 7 p.m., again, it will be done, but this time in Spanish, because we need to reach our Latino community. And so I think those kinds of efforts are really important, especially now.
Do you have a comment about that? When we're talking about access, you say that you're doing the Spanish live stream, which is really important. I have been going through this with my family. We here have access because of our language and the location we have, but having to give information to my dad, who is in Venezuela, who doesn't speak English, I started realizing that the official statements and the official information about the pandemic is primarily in English. So for someone like my dad or my mom that are in Spain, how can they have these facts? Because they're getting the information from other places and it's not necessarily true. So I have been trying to find online information for them that they can read as well, but also thinking about the countries that they don't trust their own government, that there is not this relationship that we have here. So there is only one channel of information that is not being used because they don't trust each other. So that's also really important to think about.
It is important. And I don't know, what can you tell me about the conditions for the press in Venezuela? What is it like?
Well, there is only one channel and it's the government. Everything else was suppressed. So there is no freedom of speech, to say it that way. So in one day, there was no cases. Next day, the whole country went in lockdown. They were holding information. They were not given the right facts, and people do not understand. I had to sit down with my dad and explain all the facts, because he was just getting news from Instagram, because that's the only way my people can get information.
It's so important. And you can see right there, it illustrates how vital it is to have independent sources of information, independent from the government. And in this country, our journalists are the source of that. So it's a terrible thing that's happening in Venezuela right now, because Venezuelans don't have any idea what's really taking place. Even in our country, there are differences of opinion, or there's spin on particular issues that we see sometimes coming from our government And of course, the press can be accused sometimes of taking a different tack that some people are suspicious of. But the point of the matter is, you need independent voices. You need people who are monitoring the facts. And then as a consumer, you need to look around and listen to a variety of voices to get to the place where you believe, I think I have the facts as I can closely discern them, that this is the truth.
So a follow up on that, Rick, if you were talking directly to a group of nonprofit leaders in Charlotte who generally, at least in our experience, are deeply rooted, many of them in community, are right now in many cases in constant communication with those communities, how would you advise them in that sort of, using Renee Hobbs's language here, the analyze and evaluate piece? You know, should they be, how do they know which sources are credible to share with their communities, and should they be sharing multiple sources to paint, to sort of, what should they be doing?
Well, one thing I think that would be very useful for them is to set up some kind of a hotline in which they could take in the questions, as the media is going to do today here in Charlotte. I think taking in these questions gives them an idea of where people are confused and what do they need to know more about. I also think they give them an opportunity to see what's being rumored that's not true. And while some people, this is a bit controversial, but while some people would say, well, don't mention those rumors because it only adds to it, it adds credibility to the rumor. I think it's our job to knock down those rumors and to say, these are the facts. This is not true, especially when you believe it's a widespread rumor. So I think these nonprofit organizations can help their constituencies by helping them sort through what's confusing for them. So regular hotlines, regular Q&A, again, this access and transparency is so important. And of course, in general, I think that all of us as consumers of news need to not limit ourselves to just one source. One source is not necessarily going to give us everything that we need. There was a time in this country where you selected your media outlet, and that was your media outlet, and that was all there was. But the web is so fractured, the world of media, that it's important now that you get, and it's actually can be a help to you and can enrich your understanding of what's happening by tuning in on different media and taking from each what pieces of that seem credible, that seem believable, and of course paying attention to the source, because the source is so important. There are people out there who are loyal to you as a citizen. There are journalists who are loyal to you as a citizen. There are journalists out there, or people who say they're journalists, who are actually only promoting propaganda. And there's a big difference between news and propaganda, and you need to be able to see that difference. If you hear something specific, like a rumor, and you think, or somebody's reporting something and you're going, I'm just not sure that can be true, then what you want to do is you want to go to other sources and see if they're reporting the same thing. If you get a consistency over a variety of sources that this is really happening, as extraordinary as it may be, then you may then be able to believe that that this could be a fact. But if it's not being widely reported, then chances are it's not quite right.
Andrew, any follow up there? Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, it just takes a lot more work now to be an informed citizen than most people realize.
Yeah, I was going to say something along those lines of, like, when you're saying multiple sources and doing essentially the research, I mean, there are many different ways of getting it, whether it's through print or the television or the internet. There's just, it could probably feel a little bit overwhelming. Are there any sources that you not necessarily need to go to find out the news, but to validate? Like, are there any specific websites that you go to kind of check up on this? Or if you feel like something seems really off base, are there any places that you go specifically to just find those validity of anything?
Excuse me. Yes, one of them that I use is PolitiFact. PolitiFact is a nonpartisan organization, nonprofit, based in Florida, but it's worldwide. And PolitiFact checks for the truth in statements that are being made. It began as sort of checking just the statements of politicians, but if you go to PolitiFact right now and look there, it actually has a section on coronavirus and has listed some of the most common rumors about coronavirus and myths about coronavirus. And it tells you what you can believe and what you can't believe. It has fact checkers who are working all over the world to figure out, what's real and what's not. And I visit that from time to time because I find it very illustrative of the kinds of things that I think people may be hearing that are absolutely not true, but have somehow taken hold in various communities. And I think it's a good place to go check out what's true and what's not.
I would like to add a little bit on that. With all of this going on, I realized that people don't know how to they know there is fake news, but they don't know how to check if it is. So people are just spreading news, and I think people my generation are not understanding that there's a steps to follow, because I think that follows back into the information that is given and how to defer what is true or not. So I had to stop with different friends and tell them where you get that, because they come with these tags that they got from someone who works in the government. And I think everyone has seen that text. And I'm like, where do you get that? Oh, a friend sent it. Through what? iMessage. I'm like, can you check somewhere else? I keep telling people, until it's not national news, you're stressing yourself before you have to. Mm-hmm. So there is no reason for you to be stressing right now if you don't know it's true or not.
That's so true. And the wonderful thing about the web is it can be a great resource, but particularly social media, while it's a great tool and we learn a lot from social media, it's also a place where you can be poisoned quite quickly by someone who's up to no good or passing along a rumor that shouldn't be passed along. And so people need to understand that about their social media feeds. They are open, and anyone who wants to manipulate you can post on those feeds. And exactly as Maria's saying, the next thing you know, it's being passed around from person to person. There was a study recently done by MIT that found that a false story moves so much faster than a true story, like 6 times faster, they calculated. And if you think about it, it sort of makes sense that, as humans, we're sort of geared to be drawn to what's extraordinary, and rumors typically are extraordinary. And so it's not surprising that so many people will pass along something in part because they're alarmed by it or they're wowed by it in some way, and they don't take the time to decide if it's really true or not. So social media needs to be used with great care.
Speaking of social,
but particularly in sharing social media, right?
Yeah. Right. Speaking of social media, and here we are, all in our homes, creating content, sharing that content, sharing information. The third of the 5 skills on Renee Hobbs' list is create. And so thinking again about organizations, government officials, and nonprofits, we've touched on it in several different ways, but what type of advice would you give those organizations or even individual people right now as we've had to social distance? It's great to be here and see all of you, and we normally would have an opportunity to see each other face to face during our regular work days, but that's obviously been put on hold for the time being. And so I think there's a desire for people to connect as humans as well. And one of the ways we can do that is to create information and to create stories and to share those things. So what would be your thoughts on those items?
Well, I'm just so glad that we have this availability, this technology, because you think about what it would have been like even 10 or 15 years ago, how much more isolated we would be, how much more tempted we would be to break that isolation. we can talk to one another, we can work, we can get things done, we can be entertained, there's so much we can do. I was in a meeting Monday night, a virtual meeting, of course, a meeting Monday night, and I walked out of the room where I had been on with my computer, and I told my family, I said, I haven't been anywhere today, but I just felt like I was somewhere else for a while. And I feel a lot better because of that. So I think this is an opportunity for us to use this technology to help us stay sane through this period, and to observe these important restrictions that the health authorities are putting on us for our own good. So I strongly advise people to reach out to people maybe you haven't talked to in a long time. You can do this. And I'm going to catch up with some friends that I probably wouldn't have talked to during this period. And it's a good time for other people to do that too.
Rick, are you suggesting people use their phones to call other people? Is that what I'm hearing you say? That sounds like a new thing.
Well, you can do it by phone, of course, but I think you can do it like we're doing right here.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And you can actually see your friend or your relative and say,
true.
"How have you been?" And, we've got this time on our hands. Let's catch up, right? So I think it can be that, and I think through that technology, you can feel like you've gone someplace, even though you're still in the safety of your home. So.
Yeah, one point I wanted to make, however, was with what we do at Digital Charlotte, we do work with communities and populations that might have lack of access specifically to those devices or the internet, or just the knowledge of even how to use one or both. It's not really a question, more of just maybe a comment of just kind of like, while we have the privilege to be able to sit here together and have this technology and have the knowledge of how to use it and being able to connect, there's still I would say that this is the struggle and the uphill battle that we face as Digital Charlotte, is how do we best serve those populations that don't have the access. Specifically, my wife is a CMS teacher, and we are having discussions daily, sometimes even hourly, about how we can get her students the technology and the internet access to provide, to even do the online learning that she is tasked to do right now with those with all the students that she has. How are we even getting to the point where, like what Bruce was joking about, she's calling parents and grandparents and asking them, do you have internet at home? Do you have technology? Do you have some way of connecting? And if you don't, we have to make alternative plans, because we can't continue on with online learning as we are still stuck at home.
Andrew, I'm glad you brought that up. It's so true. And we should all hope that this situation is going to finally put more pressure to bring this capability to everyone. No one should be left out. And as you point out, many people are being left out at this point, and it's so glaring. It's so obvious. I hope this finally gets more people to support spreading digital access so that everyone can have this advantage. I taught a class, an advanced reporting class last year, and we focused on this issue. And our students were stunned to realize that there were many people living in Charlotte who didn't have access. They might have a phone, but when you think about how little you can do on a phone when it comes to homework or working with your bank account or whatever it might be, we talked to people who were sitting in the parking lots of fast food restaurants so that their children could do their homework in the back seat because they could use the Wi-Fi from the restaurant. And this happens. This exists in Charlotte, and Charlotte needs to understand that, and exists even more so in rural areas. So we have a challenge, and I hope that this crisis will help more people to realize that this cannot stand. We must do something about it.
Which is, directly tied to access of information, right? And sort of I'm seeing these like two lines crosses as the pressure on media and the ability, their revenue streams are becoming more challenging, requiring them to put up paywalls and to do things to sustain, also then limits the access, which go to sort of to the traditional role of being an advocate or being a nonpartisan source of information, a reliable source. But, then there's the digital divide and the information divide, and how do we balance those two things so that there's a sustainable business model for the media outlets, and also reliable, affordable access to that connection that would provide access to that information. And I don't know this information, but I was like wondering, when you used to be able to just turn on the local news or turn on the national news, and whether it was through the rabbit ears or however you got it, or the cost of the newspaper, I don't know what it for inflation what it would be today, but if it was a penny or 5 cents 30, 40 years ago, that I don't know, but my assumption was that was accessible to the masses. Whereas today, a $30 or a $60 internet subscription is limiting to a vast majority of our community, to then be able to, especially now when you have to shelter in place, if you only have a digital antenna, and you can only get one or two sources of news, you don't have that opportunity to do some of the things that you suggested people do.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And as these models, these business models are being worked out, I think it's going to be important to the consumer, that the consumer is able to get to this at a little or no cost, just as it's historically been in this country. And this is a kind of part of what's going to be worked out. You think about, go back to the penny press of the late 19th century, early 20th century, Joseph Pulitzer and his New York World, and what he was able to the power that he had with that. His power came from the fact that he had such a large audience, and an audience that trusted him. The press today needs to realize that it needs to bring everybody into the fold, and by bringing everybody into the fold, that it's doing its job, as a public service, but it's also from that, it's taking power that it can use for good. So I think that these are things that are going to have to be worked out. I personally wish that there was some way that we could extend availability, access to good, credible news media on a regular basis to everyone, at a cost that everyone could afford.
So just being mindful of our time, just maybe a few more minutes, and the last two we've talked about. We've talked about it in a number of different ways, but just to sort of recap on the five categories of media literacy, the last two that we didn't specifically mention were reflect and act. And I think you've mentioned many times the ability to analyze and evaluate and sort of reflect back on how that information plays out in your life. What do you see in your social interactions that either validate or conflict the information you're seeing? You mentioned some ideas for some of the nonprofits to reflect, perhaps by collecting information from their communities to understand the way that they're receiving this information, how they're processing it, what questions they might have. And then the last one is act. And so maybe a couple more questions after that. But so now, if you are a media literate consumer, and you are, or you're becoming one, or you're an organization who's helping their communities become media literate, and you get to this last one, act, what do you think that means today in the context of COVID-19?
Well, act, of course, for your own personal safety, the safety of the people, your loved ones and your friends. I mean, and for your neighbors and people, your community. I mean, you can act responsibly. That's key, and understanding that. I think long term, you can act in a way that you would hope all citizens would, and that is that they would vote informed. We want all, in this country, it's a wonderful concept that we have, and that is that you as an individual, collectively, you are the boss, and you get to choose who should help manage and run our country. And so I think that, with that comes some responsibility that you understand the issues and understand what's at stake well enough to vote in a way that you think is best for our nation. So I think that is ultimately the act that I hope for everybody.
Mm. One point on that is obviously just the interesting fact that right now we're also the census is now open, and another place to act, right? So thinking about how these organizations, how these government agencies and philanthropy are thinking about encouraging their communities to return their census. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation in communities about that as well. But that's sort of, if you were to use that, access, analyze, evaluate, create, reflect, and then act in the context of the census, I think that would also help some of these partners that we're looking to communicate with today think about their role in dispelling myths, providing accurate information around the census, is another leading to the action, which would then help support our communities and their abilities to receive resources.
That is so important. I'm glad you brought up the census, because there's been a lot of confusion about the census, and this is coming at a time when many people have reasons to be suspicious of anything that appears formal, official, or from authority. And the census is so important at this point for all of our citizens. We need an accurate portrait of America, and the census is going to give us that, and through that people can be served better. So I think the nonprofits can play a huge role there to emphasize that the census is important, it is necessary. Please don't ignore it. It matters to everyone.
Andrew or Maria, do you have anything before I maybe pop in this last question? And then we can, at the end, we can just check to see if there's anybody in the chat now.
Yeah, I do not have any questions. Go ahead.
Okay. So imagining that all of your students are going to watch this, they're going to tune back in because they have some time on their hands. But, and maybe Maria, you're maybe even the better position to ask this question, but we're just thinking about, because we all work at a university. We all have different roles in the university, and pretty much every role you could have at the university is represented here, from faculty to staff to student. And so we're thinking about those students right now who are, who all of us are displaced and are facing this. But what advice would you give students in the context of sort of maybe more broadly, but then sort of bringing it back down to our topic today as it relates to media literacy in this new reality that we live in?
Well, first of all, I'd say be encouraged. Don't despair. This is serious. It's got to be taken seriously. It's going to affect our lives for some time, but this will pass, and things will return to some sense of normalcy. So if you're feeling depressed, despondent, fight that, because really this will pass. It will pass us, and we will move on. Second, it is a great time to reevaluate where you want to go and what you want to do based on how this event may have opened your mind to possibilities, to thoughts of things that you hadn't thought about before. I think that for some of my students, I know they're doing that right now. They're reimagining, who they might want to be in 5 years, or what may be important to them in 5 or 10 years. And this is a good time to take stock in that and to think about that. Some of the students are in a position now of thinking about the immediate future, because they're about to graduate and they're moving into a very unstable, uncertain job market. And I would encourage them to get counsel on, what's the next best step for me. So I think that's important. I think back to the era of the financial meltdown, which is the most important other world event that I think affected us all. And there were many students at that time. I recall, in fact, our son and daughter-in-law had just finished college. They had just gotten their jobs, but some of their friends were not at that stage yet, and their friends really needed to rethink, what should they be doing for the next few years based on the world that we have at the moment. things will return completely to normal. I don't think people necessarily need to change what matters most to them, but I think it's a good time to think about what have you learned from this experience that you can add to your understanding of where you want to go and what you want to do. I think that's important. And stay in touch, and stay in touch with your friends, stay in touch with your classmates, and expect that you are going to find normalcy again.
Maria, what do you think?
That's great. That sounds good. Yeah, I'm a senior, so it's important to think that all the seniors are going through all of this at the same time. So we have found a way to stay connected and keep talking, because it's just not me that commencement was canceled. Other universities are doing the same. So it's important to think that you're not the only one going through this.
That's right.
You mentioned it earlier, Maria, also the responsibility, perhaps is one way to put it, that you have, or that you've, in particular, you have chosen to take in terms of, including, maybe you're not using the phrase media literacy in your conversations, but encouraging your friends to be mindful about where they're getting their information, to not only help them balance in this chaos, create some sense of a phrase that I heard a long time ago from marketing was this orbiting the hairball, where everything is so chaotic, but you have to find a way to kind of orbit around it. And what would you say, Maria, just sort of putting you on the spot, to your friends as you think about like this media literacy and misinformation and this crisis that we're in?
I think before you share the information, check. There is no need. I know you want to share instantly to your friends, to your family, something that you might think is like an emergency, but first check, because you don't know, like maybe for you it's okay and it won't stress you out, but you don't know how that will affect your friend. So be mindful of that information and how it can affect someone else. That's the biggest thing.
I think that's great advice, because people do react differently, and you need to think about that before you share.
Andrew, any final thoughts? Give Rick the last comment, but
no questions or anything, but I really love this conversation we've had today.
So Rick, is there anything we didn't ask you, anything that you want to share before we say goodbye?
No, I just want to repeat that we have it within our power to overcome this. We will overcome it. I think that it's a moment for people to stand up and look after one another, and part of that is taking the responsibility of doing the right things to keep yourself and others safe. So I'm really proud of how much of that I'm seeing out in the community here in Charlotte. I'm seeing people being very responsible. I think the region that we live in here, particularly, when it's presented with a challenge, it takes up that challenge, and I believe that that I see that happening now, and I'm very, very happy to see that.
Well, we're fortunate, Rick, to have you as the Knight Crane Executive in Residence and visiting professor of journalism in the Knight School of Communication at Queens. We really appreciate your time today, your expertise. It is a real value to us, but also now to the communities we serve, to be able to hear directly from you. So thank you so much for joining us. Andrew and Maria, also thank you. Maria is helping produce this episode, so she'll be doing some editing and sharing of this information beyond that. But thank you all to our audience for joining. If you're either live with us or watching the recording, you can find this afterwards on our website at digitalcharlotte.org and across social on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We hope you can join the conversation, and we will be conducting a series of other interviews focused on health literacy, online learning, and the digital divide over the course of the next couple of days, bringing those to you live as well as sharing them after the fact. But thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.